Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. What do you get when you combine more than 10 years of talk radio experience with a conservative Christian, historical constitutionalist who has an unbridled opinion, rapier wit, and a gift for the uncommon and little-known historical facts about America? That can only describe one person. He's not only a friend for many years, host of the Hart Show, and the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth, and the newly released Unknown America for Kids. Michael regularly appears here on the third Monday of every month in the 10 o'clock hour. You can find more about him at michaelhartshow.com, as well as on the Michael Hart channel on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network through all of our apps and all of our streaming services. Michael Hart, welcome to this edition of Unknown America with the author and creator, Michael Hart.
Thank you for having me, Rabbi. It's a joy.
Well, it's always good to see you, my friend, and you and I have been close for many, many years. One of my earliest friends and most trusted friends in Birmingham, and we've done hundreds of hours of talk radio together, and now we've done almost as many hours together on television. So it continues to be a dynamic relationship. Michael, you're on the air for 3 hours every single morning, Monday through Friday, and you're bombarded with calls and conversation and opinions about this anarchist move across America. I want to get your unprepared, unbridled summary of what you see happening and what your audience is telling you that they're perceiving that's happening under the guise of Black Lives Matter, under the guise of Antifa, under the guise of all of these other agendas converging to seem to have a common goal, and one that may not be as obvious to most of the people that are watching it unfold as it might be to you and I.
Well, obviously, Rabbi, it's a deep state, and I use that in a very wide sense, but it's a deep state coup d'etat against the Trump administration. You know, the things that were going on with the police brutality, we've been hearing them in this nation for decades and decades, and what we're seeing today is the co-opting. Interestingly enough, over the course of the last several days, we haven't heard that much about George Floyd. What we've heard about is the protesters, the Antifa crowd in Seattle, are running out of food, and they don't know what to do because they're completely woefully ill-prepared, because they're doing nothing more than co-opting the death of this man. From a constitutional perspective, I not only celebrate, but I respect the fact that these groups, if in fact they feel like there is a redress that they need to be speaking to, they certainly do have the option to do so constitutionally, and they should. That's what the Constitution calls us to do. But it's the armed insurrections, it is the capturing, if you will, of public property, in the case, mostly in Seattle, the rioting, the burning. To what end does burning down a Wendy's do to support the cause, or even celebrate the life of George Floyd? It's pretty obvious on several different levels exactly what's taking place here, because we didn't hear a whole lot about police brutality back when we were talking about the impeachment. It wasn't until this occurred and then reoccurred again over the weekend in Atlanta. Same thing with gun control. That's kind of gone off the radar as well. Of course, Nancy Pelosi reminded us of it over the weekend, that, hey, that's part of our agenda also. But that's the reason, as you point out, that I do break down the prism of the past, or what's going on in the country, through that prism, because it's important that we understand we've been in many of these places before, and sometimes these responses are cyclical. But this one, without a doubt, is being co-opted as well as supported and ginned up for an agenda that I personally think has to do mostly with dismantling the economy. Coronavirus didn't work, and if this doesn't stick, there'll be something else forthcoming before November.
So you see this as a progression from crisis du jour to crisis du jour that has gone on since the Mueller investigation, since the impeachment, since the George Floyd Now we have the shooting in Atlanta. These are statistically random acts by police. These are not habitual, it's not systemic, it is not what their cry is that this is an agenda of law enforcement across the United States. And we see the response mostly from Democratic-controlled cities that is disproportionate to those cities which are under a Republican elected official who has an agenda for rebuilding and revitalizing the economy. And the issues that were of old in bringing equality to opportunity did not have to do with the redistribution of wealth. It had to do with passing laws that didn't allow you to discriminate because of race, religion, or national origin. It had to do with affirmative action, which was adopted by America as making sure that there was equal opportunity. I do see a disparity in the white community investing in the black community and bringing in programs which will raise the literacy level. We had a guest on that had done a complete sociological analysis that said that the black church, which is not a racist statement, and I want to make sure that's very clear, the black church is an entity. The black church is the church which is deeply entrenched in the inner city, in the community where these problems are happening. And they found, excuse me, that 70% of the youth that get involved in the black church's programs, youth programs, educational programs for tutoring and for raising literacy levels, that 70% of them wind up becoming high school graduates and going off to college. And when they return to the community, if they plug back into the black church, then they do not become gang members. They do not get involved in drugs. They do not leave their homes. They understand the sanctity of marriage, and they believe in having two parents in the home, and they're committed to the covenant of marriage. They also say very clearly that those that do not connect with the black church are subject to the fatherless home, to the gang activities, to being disenfranchised, to taking advantage of the welfare system, and that the black church's role in the community should be where we should be putting our support, as the Protestant, white Protestant church should be investing, not planting churches in their communities, because, listen, I don't understand the plight of the black youth. I don't speak the language. I don't understand the culture. I readily admit that. I've had a panel here of experts on the black church to explain to me the role of the black church and why it should exist as a separate entity, and it is not racist. And I was very concerned in the debate, the third debate between Clinton and Trump, where the term black church was evoked 3 times. And it did not sit right with me as a Jew. It didn't sit right with me as a Jewish believer. I thought, why do we have this distinction? And so I wanted to know from black leaders in Birmingham, Alabama, had a panel of the director of the Civil Rights Institute, one of my board members who's an African-American pastor of a church in the inner city, to explain to me, to educate me and the audience of what this entity called the black church is and why they want to maintain that identity. And it is not to the exclusion of white people. It is to serve the needs on the streets of the black community, where they understand the culture, they grew up in the culture, they know what the temptations are, they know what programs are needed. And what they're asking for is to saying, look, to the white church in the suburbs, to the suburban church that could be multiracial, listen, don't come plant your congregation in our community as a branch and try to do good work here because you think that's your mission field. This has been our mission field for 100 years. Come alongside of us. You have resources we don't have. You have funds we don't have. If we need to build a community center, don't you build it. help us build it. Come alongside of us and help build it, and let us staff it, let us support it, let us reach out to the community, because we live next door to these people. We're in this community, and we know that if we together can raise the level of the community, then we can, it's the whole concept, raise the letter and all the boats rise. Right. That this is an important work. So it's not surrounded about Black Lives Matter. It's that the message to the Black community, to the inner city community, is to be conveyed by people who understand it. That's why when Barack Obama, who was a community organizer, rose to power, because he allegedly came out of that community and could represent it. He failed to do so during his administration. He failed miserably to be the first Black president to bring light into the plight of the community and to get evangelical support for that community. I don't know of a single pastor in any church who is involved in the mission field, which is the call for all churches to be involved in local and in other mission fields, that they would not want to make a contribution to support the growth and the establishment of programs within the inner city that would educate, that would bring tutoring. And if we look statistically, the literacy rates running at 70% of incarcerated youth have a literacy rate of below the third grade level. Their parents are functionally illiterate. Okay, so if a parent can't teach his child to read, then he's not equipping that child for life. So there can be programs that are brought in. I believe it was Bush, his wife, that brought the whole reading is fundamental concept to the United States, and yet the answer to that became Common Core. It didn't become these investments into community tutoring centers in the inner city and making it available at no cost. Is that welfare reform? No. That's educational reform. That's finding out that the core problem in the community is literacy. If you take a look at our prison system, over 2 million adults incarcerated in our prison system, the literacy rate of the average incarcerated prison is somewhere between the 3rd and 5th grade reading level. This is the key to employment. If I can't read to go get a job, then I'm relegated to those jobs where reading is not required. There's some real core issues that are not being addressed, but this vicious attack on democracy, this vicious attack on capitalism, or this vicious attack on social justice, which is at its core is the redistribution of wealth. It's the Robin Hood approach to life. Rob the rich and give to the poor. That's not really what is going to alter the success of a disenfranchised community that in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s were relegated to the communities that they lived in. Okay? We do have a responsibility to recognize that, yes, they're still where we put them based on discrimination. Okay? How do we then support them to get them opportunity to come out of it? Not by welfare, not by food stamps, not by fatherless homes, but how do we get to the heart of it and make a contribution? Not reparations, but take a social responsibility for saying, yes, we are the product of generations past that have created the ghetto, have created the inner city. Okay? These used to be the trendy places to live. Now they're the projects. Things have changed dramatically, and if we take a look historically, then there is some responsibility, but when people are trying to kill you, When people are burning down your businesses, you're not thinking about how you can proactively bring opportunity to the situation. And it's the wrong response to try to develop the right answers.
There's an awful lot to unpack there, Rabbi, but if you'll permit me to take the gloves off for just a moment. Number one, to your point about literacy in the inner cities. I don't even know if you know this about me, but many, many years ago, I was heavily involved with an organization called Toastmasters International, teaches public speaking skills. Part of my contribution to that organization as a state officer, I actually went into the prison system in the state of Alabama. Mount Meigs, Holman, Atmore, you name it, I've been there. And one of the things that Toastmasters had discovered is in prisons where you had Toastmasters clubs and you had the incarcerated in these clubs, where the recidivism rate, the rate of people that would leave prison, would come back, the recidivism rate was typically 77% for exactly the things you speak to. If somebody had graduated at whatever level in Toastmasters and learned how to communicate, how to read, how to spell, how to convey their message and their thought, that dropped from 77 to 17%. So it goes back to your point. But here's where I see the problem. And it might be a little bit difficult to completely unpack and to do so without offending some. But I think a big part of the problem is within the white community, we don't understand the message of the black community. Now, you mentioned not having a lot of experience in the inner city. I've got an enormous amount, not just because of what I've done. I go off and do reading camps and initiatives, but I've also in the past, my background is in contracting. It's not in media. I got into the media 15 years ago, quite accidentally. But I used to spend a lot of time in the inner city doing construction projects, HUD reclaims, and things of this nature with the very people you're talking about. But here's a problem that we have. We have the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We've got Black Entertainment Television. We've got a clothing line called FUBU, For Us, By Us. We've got special interest groups that are strictly related to the African American community. And although the black colleges, the historically black colleges, do not prohibit whites from entering into those schools, they are obviously historically black. The reason I bring this up is there's a message from the black community that we have ours over here. It's almost like how we were chastised back in the 60s and 70s for separate but equal. But then once we reversed the separate but equal policies, now all of a sudden the black community is seeking separate but equal and almost self-segregating. So there's a message here along the lines of what you're speaking to, because white community doesn't really know very much about how to respond to this. If we come into your cities, are we encroaching on your turf? You've established very fine, defined lines of what is yours and what you'd like to keep out of us. You want respect from the white community, but do you want to be parallel to the white community? Do you want to be assimilated by the white community, or the white community assimilated by you? What's the answer? We don't know. We've never been told because we have never got a legitimate and codified definition from the black community. One day it's about the black churches. They themselves call them black churches. And you know, Birmingham, Alabama, exactly what I'm speaking to. One day, get all the white people out of the black churches, get all the white people out of the black neighborhoods. Then the next day we want some kind of sustenance, economic sustenance, to grow our communities and reinvest back in them. So which is it? Do we want to assimilate both of these races, these cultures, into one another? Is one going to be assimilated into the left or the right or the black or the white or whatever the case may be? What about the National Association for the Advancement of White People? We would be abhorred by such a move. No, we're not abhorred by the National Association for the Advancement of African Americans or black people, because we understand the need for them to preserve their culture and their heritage, which quite frankly is vibrant and rich in unknown America. I got a whole chapter written on unknown black America, because the contributions of the black community as per capita, and there's such a small representation of our community, it's only 13% total of Americans, but they've made amazing contributions to this country. Many of them go unrecognized. So how do we deal with that? But to me, the underlying thing is the message. Which is it? Do you want us in? Do you want you out? Do you want separate but equal? Do you want everybody together? Because I've not heard the answer. All I've heard is, you know, you come to our neighborhoods, you've encroached in our neighborhoods, then we leave the neighborhoods, and then the white people abandon us. We go back to the Compromise of 1877, which gives us the exact same argument. The Yankees left the Deep South, and we get what's called the Dreamer Democrats coming down here and enslaving everybody and instituting Jim Crow. So they want all the white soldiers from the North to come back. Then they come back and they're ousted again. It's an extremely confusing position, and one that, quite frankly, a lot of the white apparatus in America doesn't understand, because it's never been clearly defined as to exactly what peace and harmony and respect looks like in this country. Because no matter where we go, it always seems to change once we get there.
So what do we do?
I think your observation about the white churches supporting the black churches to the degree that they will allow that to occur is spot on. I've made the comment many times before, let's take one Sunday a month and all the white people go to the black churches, etc., and vice versa. I'm not prejudiced, but I'm not prejudiced. And I was raised in a prejudiced home, but I'm not prejudiced because I have black friends. Why do I have black friends? Because I just don't look at somebody's skin, and if somebody's got, they want to bestow their friendship with me, their loyalty to me, I'll return the favor. We'll be loyal, we'll be friends, we'll go out and do whatever we're going to do. We'll be friends. But the majority of people, there are these clearly defined lines. I mean, using a local reference that none of your audience is going to get, but you will, Mountain Brook, Alabama. You go over the mountain, all of a sudden you're in the city. You're leaving the $10 million mansions, and all of a sudden you're in the ghetto. That line is not clearly defined. It's just something which happens to be a socioeconomic boundary that's there. There needs to be some blending because, quite frankly, racism and bigotry typically goes away when there is a measure of familiarity with those that you are so distanced from. If you know black people, the neighborhood that I'm broadcasting from, we got Asians in this neighborhood, black people in this neighborhood. I got a gay neighbor up the street over here. We all hang out together. We're all inclusive. I might not necessarily agree with some people's lifestyle choices, but that's not for me to judge. That's not for me to sort that out. The simple reality of it is that in areas where you have these codified groups, I mean, just like how many black Americans bemoan the black Americans that moved into my neighborhood because it happens to be a little tonier than the one they live in. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And then they're called Uncle Tom. And Uncle Tom, quite frankly, was a very gallant figure in history. He's actually kind of an amalgamation from Harriet Beecher Stowe, but he was based on a black minister who was an amazingly strong man. The narrative is wrong, the history is wrong, and the message is wrong. And instead of talking about that, we're talking about Wendy's and George Floyd and whether or not Black Lives Matter has been co-opted. We're having the wrong conversation.
So, Michael, how do we stop crisis management and begin to proactively? Is it the role of the church and I read one article about reparations and said it should be the church that provides not reparations but takes mission support and invests instead of in Honduras or Guatemala or mission trips to Uganda or to Kenya, that we need to take care of matters at home first and deal with some of the core issues in the inner city. And that the suburban churches should participate in allocating, I believe they came up with a number, if you took $10 per congregant and earmarked that for inner city churches and inner city programs, that if all of the suburban churches were to do that, to just kind of take a head count, you have 50,000 in your congregation, write a check for 500,000. You have 100 people in your congregation, write a check for $1,000, and invest in the inner city. Don't come try to do it for us. Right? Support us in the execution of this work. Mission is supposed to begin at home, in the home. Then it's supposed to go and bleed out to the neighborhood. From the neighborhood to the community, from the community to the city, from the city to the state, from the state to the nation. This is what mission work is defined as. We've become these foreign missionaries and supporting work in Kuala Lumpur. We have problems here at home, and maybe this is the clarion call to say it's time for us to stop solving as a nation. When President Trump was elected, it was, we're going to stop being the fixer of the world's problems, and we're going to put our attention back at home. is this a call for the evangelical Christian to say, we're going to stop taking a look at the problems in Papua New Guinea and in Honduras and in Central America, and take and do our mission work here at home first and make America great again, because the evangelical church in America is now serving as a mission funder to inner city mission work to be carried out not by our own inner city missionaries, but by supporting those who are already committed and established to the work in the inner city.
This is a clarion call for Christians to stop acting like Christians and start acting like followers of Christ, because there is a difference. And there's a lot of people that, I've done my good deeds, I've done my good act, and I'm a white guy and I put on a Black Lives Matter T-shirt, and George Floyd, sorry, what would Jesus do? I'm a great Christian, and I'm sorry. That's and I don't get me wrong. There's no piety here, because my gosh, I got a bag of sin I got to drag around with me everywhere I go. But at the end of the day, we got really lousy leadership, whether it's in Washington, D.C., the House of Representatives, Montgomery, Alabama, or even some of our churches. When a black minister is suspicious of a white minister trying to help out, and I realize there's a lot of great black ministers, don't get me wrong, and there's a lot of white ones out there that need to be probably sitting in the pulpit, or in the pew rather than the pulpit. But at the end of the day, we got really bad leadership. At the top of the show, you mentioned Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King would be appalled by this. There'd be no support from Martin Luther King on this issue, and we know that because there was no support from Martin Luther King on a violence response when he was alive. He was very much in opposition to this type of strategy, and he was a fallen man. He was a broken man, and he knew it, and his family knew it, and his community knew it. But there's so many people, even in his leadership group, that were so angry with him for not getting more violent than he did. We know this from his niece, Dr. Alveda King, and we know it from history, and we know it from the way that he conducted himself. He was a warrior with words, but he was a good, solid leader that put the cause and the people first, as opposed to his own ability to influence them. There's a lot of black pastors out there that don't want to lose the possibility of influencing their congregation out of fear it might get out that they took some money, or they partnered up with a white church or a messianic church, or whatever the case may be. And that's also an issue, because when you break it down in that regard, they're politicians. And there's a big church right here in Birmingham, Alabama, that you're well aware of, that I'm going to leave nameless. That pastor is as much a politician as anybody in this state, albeit maybe unintentionally. He has the power and the influence of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And so the most innocent action by somebody in that situation all of a sudden brings on heaps of suspicion. But we've got to get to a place where we realize that the congregation, the flock, must go where the pastor goes. When Martin Luther King backed his people up on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that fateful day before marching into those Alabama state troopers, he showed more courage. He showed faith in the Lord. He showed faith in the cause and a willingness to defend his congregation, as opposed to trying to make national news or influence an outcome. He came back a second time and he won it. He got the Voting Rights Act through and the Civil Rights Act through, and he got it through because he was courageous enough to stand up to his convictions and say, no, this is not the right way to do it. This is. We need that in the White House. We need it in the State House. We need it in our churches, our pulpits, and in our politicians. And we need voters wise enough to know the difference.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. We're talking with Michael Hart, author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth, and host of the Michael Hart Show, heard daily right here in Birmingham, Alabama. And now, along with us, you can hear him through us on iHeart, Spotify, iTunes. Watch him on Roku live, Amazon Fire TV live, Android TV live, and on Apple TV live, and on your Roku channel. So you have lots of opportunity to see Michael, and you can watch many of the interviews with him on the Michael Hart channel, on our featured guest segment of our program. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in this narrative about what's happening in the United States and why The message is being sent but confused, too many voices, too many factions, too many agendas converging, and the real heart of the matter is not being addressed because of all the rhetoric. There is no cohesion in the message, and there is no legislation being tied to this that will change anything whatsoever other than the advancement of violence and anarchy on the streets of America. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitingnation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Michael Hart, host of The Michael Hart Show, and the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Michael, Golda Meir, the first female prime minister of Israel, made this statement: "One cannot and must not try to erase the past merely because it does not fit the present." In Judaism, we celebrate the remembrance of the Holocaust on a day called Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. We do it with the tagline that says that if we do not remember, it will happen again. Combined with Golda Meir's statement, "One cannot and must not try to erase the past merely because it does not fit the present," this move towards the tearing down of anything that reminds us of our past as a nation will only pave the way to us forgetting the lessons of history, which history repeats itself. And if we do not remember our history and keep it as a plumb line and as a boundary, as a strong fence to keep us from drifting over the other side of that. If we tear the fence down, there are no boundaries, and we wind up falling into the same trap again. Think about the Nazi agenda, which was to what? Defund the police, It was to replace it with the Hitler Youth. It was to replace it with the SS. It was to replace it with a government support for an agenda that wound up being the destruction of Europe, the annihilation of 6 million Jews, 4 million Gentiles, 10 million killed over a span of 1939 to 1945. The Jewish population decimated by 1/3. We are the only people group in the world whose population is less today than it was in 1939. 1939 we were 18 million, today we're 14 million. We're still recovering from that Holocaust. And if we throw out all the icons of the Holocaust, if we throw out Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, the Holocaust museums around the globe, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the organizations which are devoted to the advancement of wiping out anti-Semitism in the world. You now have organizations like Black Lives Matter that have an anti-Semitic agenda. They are opposed to Jewish people. It is within their charter. And so this tearing down of statues which were not there to edify the person who was enshrined, it was to remind us of what was done in the name of man with man's agenda to subjugate one man to another, which was not a model, a biblical model, and to never again have leaders who were going to take up that much power to advance a cause that would divide the nation so rapidly. But we have the abolitionist statues being torn down. We have the Confederate statues being torn down. We have people who have no knowledge whatsoever of what it is they're destroying, tearing it down because all icons need to be removed and torn down and all history erased so that they can rewrite history to support their own agenda, straight out of the Marxist handbook, straight out of every method to bring socialism and Marxism to a nation is being employed by this group. And it seems like Washington is afraid to call it for what it is. There are voices in Washington that have the platform to bring this to America's light, and yet they're not doing so. They are, again, responding and reacting as opposed to proactively establishing, one, using the power of the pen, legislation, to enact laws which are going to fix some of the problems in law enforcement, some of the problems in disparity, and some of the problems in revitalizing the inner city, not because you're building new condominiums and turning abandoned buildings into high-priced lofts, but to bringing literacy programs and to bringing educational programs and to bringing medical clinics into the community to provide for opportunity and to have incubators for business investment, that you might take advantage of the skills that you. The goal is not to get out of the inner city. The goal is to raise the level of the inner city to a higher level. And It's not just do I get them out like the Ben Carsons and like the Condoleezza Rices and the other people who have grown to prominence where they don't live in the inner city anymore. It was their ticket out. We look at the basketball players. It was their ticket out. The NFL players. It was their ticket out. What is it we need to do to make it so that it's not a ticket out, it's actually a way to revitalize the community?
Well, I think some of the things that you pointed out earlier about the reinvestment in the community, certainly is a start. But then again, you look at places like, downtown Birmingham, for example, very vibrant area, at least it had been coming up. Got a new stadium downtown and a lot of, if you're into this kind of stuff, micro breweries and nightclubs, the culinary scene here, very vibrant. And a lot of things that are just really quite positive in the city, which quite frankly I'll credit the previous mayoral administration for that. But then you get the current mayor, and we have all the debate about the Confederate statues. We're wrapping one in a cardboard dress, if you will, which has now been torn down. Interestingly enough, this particular statue was in a park right in front of City Hall, between City Hall and the police station. That was in a predominantly black park in terms of the people that visit it, because it's a civil rights icon park, because it was adjacent to where Bull Connor brought the fire hoses out against the blacks in the 1960s. The statue was a constant reminder of that period of time. Now it no longer exists. I also find it quite amusing, but sad in a sense, that the monument to the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, the Union Regiment, was defaced in Massachusetts, and the words bigot pasted all over it, and racist, and hate you, and all the nasty words. Well, the Massachusetts 54th was a black regiment. It was a black regiment that fought in the Union. As a matter of fact, it even paraded, because it was very much supported by Frederick Douglass, the black abolitionist. The Massachusetts 54th is a full 100% black regiment, fully armed, went into battle. Most of them were wiped out at the fort to fight a Battery Wagner. Valiant fighters. Only the commander was white, the commander, junior commander. But the point is, here it is defaced. This was actually the baby of Frederick Douglass, who was a Frederick Douglass Republican. We had black Republicans back in the 1860s. Did we ever learn about the Massachusetts? Did we ever learn about Frederick Douglass or his beliefs or his policies? No, we don't, because we don't cherish the history. Since you brought that up as well, I mentioned Martin Luther King a moment ago. You have the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. How many people paid on that bridge? But it's interesting is that now we want to change the name of it to the Freedom Bridge or the Victory Bridge or whatever. Edmund Pettus was a Confederate commander. And every time a black person drives across that bridge or walks across that bridge to this day, it's a victory for civil rights. Why would we fail? Why would we fail to remind people of that? And while we're at it, why don't we just take Treblinka or Sobibor or Auschwitz and turn them into condominiums?
I mean, I'm speechless. We have done so many things that to create awareness, but then Common Core came along and selectively removed a lot of the historical lessons and created an agenda of its own. Ever since Reagan implemented the Department of Education at the federal level, which really, as much of a Reagan fan as I am, this is one of the areas that I'm not a Reagan fan. That the lessons taught in Selma, Alabama are not the same lessons that should be taught in Compton, California. And the testing of our young people should not be uniform and universal from Selma, Alabama to Compton, California. The vernacular, the examples, the messaging of it is completely different, and what we should be measuring is and creating curriculum which meets the aptitude and the social construct, the context of some of the issues that are present in those locations, and what history needs to be covered in those locations, and what's going to develop the kind of leaders we want for the future. So this was, up until Reagan, it was the state's responsibility for education, driven down to the local county, to the local city, to the Board of Education. And so now we have multiple tiers. Here in Alabama, we have the County Board of Education, and we have a City Board of Education. We have a State Board of Education, and then we have the Federal Department of Education. That's 4 layers of administration and government, which is absolutely a waste of taxpayer dollars and has affected only a decline in literacy in America And tied to that, that 90% of the youth that are in our youth detention programs are functionally illiterate. 90%. That 70% of families that take advantage of social welfare are a literacy rate that is below, at or below the third grade standard. This is the method in used to oppress a people, is to deprive them of education, because it's education and the ability to read that's their ticket out of their circumstance. And yet none of the programs, No Child Left Behind, is the antithesis of elevating the literacy level of an American citizen. We are the wealthiest country in the world, the most powerful, but we are one of the least educated countries in the world because of our constant poor performance in the areas of literacy. And with the redundancy in the system, the monies that are being diverted to fund these departments of education at multiple levels is a huge waste of taxpayer dollars, and none of it's getting down to the level in which it can affect any change. And we have these career politicians who have been in office 40, 50, 60 years. They were there when the problem got created, and they're still the same problem. And it brings us to the point of this administration has now been blamed for 50 or 60 years of history being heaped on the shoulders of Donald Trump as if he was the one responsible, when for 8 years we had a black president that did nothing as a black community activist to carrying that message to the streets of America and improving life for his own constituency, which was the black community of Chicago, which is now the hotbed of more black-on-black crime than any other city. It is the world headquarters of black-on-black crime. So what can we do to fix this other than say, if you've been in office for more than 20 years, you don't deserve to be in office any longer. You're a part of the problem. Should there be term limits? If there's term limits for the president, should there be term limits for a senator?
You can make the argument for and against term limits. The argument obviously against term limits is getting fresh blood, or for term limits rather, is getting fresh blood. Against would be the people are there, they're entrenched, and they know the way the game works and the system works. That in and of itself as a defense is problematic. I do believe, one of the interesting things about at least the House of Representatives, from the perspective of the Founding Fathers, is they wanted local representation of business owners and farmers and teachers, other academians as well, to be the citizen politician to serve for a few terms and then go home. But at the end of the day, much of what you've talked about today, Rabbi, has kind of circumnavigated the education system. That's where we're falling. That's where we're failing. I know that you got a lot of listeners, no telling how many now. I've got a lot as well. And I hear all the time, until I found your show, I never really cared about politics. I never really thought it involved me. I never thought it was interesting. But now that I found out who you are, or this guy or that girl broadcaster, now I'm interested. Now I like what I'm hearing, and I'm learning. And because I'm learning, that's why I wrote Unknown America. Unknown America is not comprehensive. It's a bathroom reader. There's 50 stories in there that are 2 and 3 paragraphs long. The idea behind the book is to stimulate people to go, wow, I didn't know that. And if I didn't know that, maybe I didn't know this. And to investigate and learn and study and learn about the fascinating things about this nature, not just about what I talk about, but the whole nation is, in its complexity and its completeness. Education's everything. I mean, we can't even discuss inner city violence and black on black crime until we have the education conversation. I mean, 18 people dead in Chicago in one day. Baghdad doesn't pull those kind of numbers. It's insane. But then you got, Lori Lightfoot and all her minions running around town. Then you got this jackaloon mayor in Seattle that says these 6 blocks that are started out as Chaz but are now Chop apparently is really nothing more than a big block party. And there are people out there that believe this tripe. We have uneducated people electing uneducated politicians, and that's a problem because we don't have the school systems teaching what needs to be taught. We don't teach civics. We don't teach history. We've adopted Common Core in our math where 1 + 1 = a rooster, and we just don't get anything, and there's not enough people. Again, earlier you mentioned about evangelicals. Evangelicals, the stat was a good stat for about 3 or 4 years ago. I haven't looked at it lately. 51% of evangelicals don't vote in national elections. That's a problem. Why are they not there? They got a God's got this complex. Most people, that's why I said, Christians, forget the Christians. Let's get the people that follow Christ, in office that understand what's really going on. There's enough conservatives in this country right now, to overthrow Roe versus Wade. Why are we still talking about abortion in this country? Why? 39% of people in this country report to be liberal. A huge portion of the rest are conservative or independent. Why is Roe v. Wade still in the books? Because the Christians talk it, but they don't walk it. And that's a problem. I don't even care if they're Christmas tree Christians, the ones that only celebrate one day a year or bring out the figgy pudding, because there's too many people. Our pastors don't preach hard. We've gotten the prosperity gospel going for us. That's what's going on in Birmingham, Alabama, where a lot of churches are up in arms about that. The church as a whole is doing battle within itself. And I use that in terms of the Protestants, the Catholics, the inner city churches, which are predominantly African-American or African-American Baptist extension. The church is combating itself. And until we get education and the churches all in one, because there is no this church and that church and the other church, it's the church. It's the bride of Christ. And we've lost sight of that as well. I think it begins with education. And something else too, I went to a Catholic school. I went to a school, you can't see this, but that's my scar on my hand from my second-year Latin teacher, Sister Mary Catherine, when I wasn't paying attention. We need a few more yardstick scars out there on some of American school kids, so they learn a lesson and their parents learn it. We bring literacy to the absolute forefront of the most pressing thing in this country. Repatriate these American dollars from Guam and other places like this that are going to the Clinton Foundation to support rice paddy crops in Suriname or the Pacific Rim or whatever the case may be. Keep our veterans from sleeping up under bridges and make education and biblical truth and education our number one priority. And I put them there collectively, and then we can start having debates about what to do in the inner cities, because a lot of those problems, in my opinion, they abate all on their own once people really understand what they're doing to themselves.
Amen. Amen. We've been talking with Michael Hart, as we do in this hour on the third Monday of every month in the 10 o'clock hour. He's the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. He is also a featured guest here, and you can watch him on Roku Live, Amazon Fire, on Apple TV, on Android TV. Get our Igniting a Nation app and watch him live on every device that's out there, whether it's Apple or Android, and follow him on the michaelhartshow.com. We're going to take a short break, and we thank Michael for being with us here, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And when we come back from break, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. Michael, thanks so much for this hour.
Thank you, Rabbi.